Hey, Jen.
Hey, Dana.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Hypnosis.
And beyond. Today, we have a very special woman on. She is a certified clinical hypnotherapist. She specializes in grief and cancer and pediatric hypnotherapy. She's also a prolific writer and a mentor to countless hypnotherapists.
Well, hey, Kelly. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're thrilled.
My pleasure. I've been looking forward to it.
Yay. Well, for those of our viewers that don't know who you are, could you share a little bit about the journey that led you to today? How's that?
Well, I'm 66 years old, so I don't think you have enough time in this in this interview to cover all of that. But if we're talking in the context of hypnosis, I've been a hypnosis practitioner. I'm in my 23rd year,
Wow.
and for a lot of my adult life, even prior to that, I was self-employed. And there just came a point in my life where I'd sold a business, and I was thinking, okay, now what's next? And I went on a blind date. And while I didn't fall for this fellow, I fell for what he was talking about. He was a hypnotherapist, and I was just entranced. I thought this might be it. And as life will happen for us, within a couple months, there was a 1 year certification course in my local community college. And so I signed up and took it. And the rest is kind of history. I fell in love with hypnosis and everything that it encompasses. We know that it's an umbrella for so many different approaches, but mainly the idea of turning people on how to use the power of their own mind to make changes in their lives was uh, you know uh, an illumination for me personally,
Yeah.
because as with many of us, when we're going through training, we're making personal changes for ourselves, and that's where we really get to experience how powerful hypnosis can be in in small ways, but in also really big ways. So I was sold from the get-go, and I just continued to develop my practice here in this corner of Washington State where I live. I'm up in the northwest corner. I'm about halfway between Vancouver, uh, BC, and Seattle.
Wow, it
And
must be beautiful.
it is, I'm very fortunate. It's a lovely place to live, and the people here in Washington State are very open to hypnosis. There's a long history of hypnosis being used here, and our state does regulate us. We're registered as hypnotherapists, so we're recognized, and but it is not restrictive to us either, and I appreciate that nice balance. So yeah, I just kind of built my practice, and somewhere along the way, I started to have this affinity for working with young people. And that's one of the things that I'm kind of known for, is being a pediatric hypnotist. And I think it started with my martial arts training, because I trained for 15 years in Okinawan in Shito-ryu karate. And it was a family dojo, so lots of kids there. And it was about the same time I was learning hypnosis. And as you can imagine, people get a little nervous, people of all ages, when they're having to go out and perform in public or getting into a sparring competition with a stranger at a competition. And it was a really great way for me to start practicing some of the things I'd learned, but also to start to develop some of my own things. And, you know, I think that sometimes people in our industry, when they first start, if they don't have some kind of psychiatry or psychotherapy background, they may worry about that. And for me, I don't have any of it. It was a freedom that I could use my own intuition and my own experience over life and of being a mother to understand how kids' minds work and maybe what they needed without having to be distracted by diagnostic terms and labels. And
Yeah.
it's not that I don't ignore those when it's important to, because we all understand, the value of scope of practice. But yeah, I think it really gave me a freedom. to create some of my own things and think outside of the box. So that's what I've done.
Wow. Very cool. So with kids, do you find that there's particular, you mentioned the performance, confidence and maybe performance anxiety. Do you find that children come to you with sort of, is there a niche within that? Or I'd love to hear more about your practice with kids.
Yeah, there can be. It's interesting though that the issues that kids have are very similar to the issues that adults have. And you've probably heard that same comparison that the subconscious mind is has been likened to that of a bright 8-year-old. We're all kids inside, right? Huh. I was a kid once, so were you. And I remember when I was a child, I was probably about 10 or 11, and something had happened. I don't even remember what it was, but it was something of, emotional import and impact. And I remember telling myself, I am going to remember how this feels so that when I'm an adult, I'll have the compassion that I needed at that time and didn't get. And that was one of those profound moments. And apparently my subconscious was listening, because when I work with a kid, I do remember that. And I remember that even though, they're a child, their world is greatly impacted uh, proportionately differently than with adults, right?
Hmm.
And so when they have anxiety, an adult may be able to use all of their mature resources to deal with it, but a child is more limited, and it may be impacting them at an even greater degree. So,
Mm.
you asked about some of the things that kids may come uh,
Yeah.
to us that work with children. It can be anything on the spectrum. Certainly, sports performance is one of them. I've worked with some uh, excellent athletes, teenagers, even young kids, and often it is that kind of pressure that not only do coaches and parents put on the children, but the kids put on themselves. It's a special group of kids that excel to that level. They have this ability to really commit themselves to something, uh,
Yeah.
even putting aside other things that other children would be, or teenagers would be dealing with. It's that important to them, but that can come with a price. Um, but I think on a larger scale, often it's important to work systemically, because when kids have problems, the whole family has it.
Sure.
And they don't arrive there independently. There's usually some dynamics going on within the family that has been contributing to it. And I think one of the things that happens is that parents might think, oh, this is going to be the magic bullet to help my kid, and unless the parents are on board and making changes too, then we're basically throwing the kid right back into that. And it's really important to consider how everybody's playing a role. And often I will suggest that a parent have a session with me if they like. But
Hmm.
even having them present during a session, and I now work exclusively online. For years I had, an in-person office, but having them be present can be extremely helpful, because they're witnessing what we're doing, the language we're using with their kid. Um, Maybe we're teaching them some self-hypnotic uh, process, and sometimes I'll use a parent for a demo subject, which you can imagine, especially with teenagers, they love it, because it takes the spotlight off of them, and then they get to see their parent, be um, hypnotized in some way, and then the parent can have the context of that too, so that they can support what we're doing in a better way.
Wow. That's fascinating to me. I wonder about the willingness of parents to get involved, because it is a whole system, like you say. And so, do most of the kids that you work with, is it the parents that find you? Are the kids' friends working with you and then they hear about it? Or, do you come across parents that don't want to, get involved?
Yeah,
Let's hear more about that.
those are great questions, and it. Typically, it's a parent, and most people find me through a referral. Unfortunately, a lot of our colleagues don't want to work with kids. They're wouldn't say they're afraid of it, but maybe, just not comfortable with it. And it's
Mhm.
been my cause now for over 10 years to help educate other hypnotists about how fun it really can be. It can balance your whole practice out, getting to work with these wonderful, imaginative human beings, right?
Mhm.
And and so I get a lot of referrals. And sometimes, yes, it might be the case where one parent talks to another and says, "Hey, hypnosis helped my kid, and here's the person." Um, it's pretty rare for a kid to reach out on their own. I think I can only really think of maybe one instance, and here in Washington State, kids over the age of 13 can access outpatient treatment without parental permission. And so I had a 17-year-old who was in running start, meaning she was going to college already, and she needs some help with some of her study skills. And she was pretty independent. She was still living at home, but she was paying her own bills and working. And she hired me for a couple of sessions and she paid me. That's about
Wow.
the only time I think I would ever engage with a kid without their, parents being on board like that either. Hypnosis is just a little bit different than other mental health resources. So I think the big caveat is, and this is where sometimes the hook comes in, is that the kid is willing. Because
Mhm.
as you can imagine, there are parents that want us to fix their problem child or their child with a problem.
Sure.
And sometimes a kid doesn't think that they have the problem. And I've had that happen. And I've gotten much better at sussing that out ahead of time. But there have been times where, I'll show up with a session and especially online, and the kid is like, does not know why they're here, or they're hiding under a hoodie and they refuse to engage. And, in those cases, it's been a variety. Sometimes, if they're willing to engage with me, I might, do some conversational things. I might use a little NLP because
Uh-huh.
NLP seems to be a little bit safer, right? You're not actually
Mhm.
going into a trance, although we know the truth about that. Or I might teach them something like some EFT or tapping. But,
Mhm.
um, you know, I give them a lot of space because we need to have their buy-in. The,
Absolutely.
you know, I don't know how you guys feel about the idea that hypnosis cannot make you do anything that you wouldn't do.
Mhm.
I don't know how you guys feel about that. That's something that's often presented, and of course, I think it's something that is good to tell kids to alleviate any fears that they have. The
Mhm.
truth is that their parents are very hypnotic, aren't they?
Mhm.
The television is very hypnotic.
Mhm.
Hypnotic influences all around us, making us do things that we never thought we would do. And
Mhm.
so it's like this delicate balancing of that. But my whole goal with children is to empower them so that they can take control of themselves. And this is really, in essence, what young people want. If you think back to when you were a child, think about all the things that the adults were managing for you. And maybe you had parents that really gave you a lot of room. Maybe you didn't. Uh, but a lot of kids feel that, especially when they're getting to those preteen, teen years. They want to have more agency in their life. And
Mhm.
and so when I'm working with a kid like that, I want to give them that idea that they are having lots of choice within our session. So I'm using lots of double binds. I'm using lots of, you can keep your eyes open or you can close your eyes. It's totally up to you. And this is what breaks down those walls of fear or,
Mhm.
resistance even, so that
Mhm.
we can do more with the time that we have together.
And I've found I do work with kids also. I was a high school teacher before for years, and I just love those teenage years. I find it fascinating how self aware most kids really are. I don't know that adults give kids enough credit for, you know, being able to name their areas of weakness or the things they want to improve on. They know.
They really do. And you having that background, I understand that because you've been there in the trenches with them, right? You get to see how they're thinking and how they're relating not just to the world but to themselves. And um, I just worked yesterday with an 11-year-old who was freaking amazing. This girl who has had anxiety since about age of 5 or 6, and we were about maybe 15 or 20 minutes into our session, which in that beginning we're getting to know each other, and I make a point of teaching some form of self-hypnosis to most of my clients, and I want them to have that tool so that they can compound whatever we do in a session, and again, it will give them that sense of empowerment. And so we were doing that, and she interrupted me. She raised her hand very politely, and I said, "Yes." And she said, "Are we already doing hypnosis?" She knew that we were, even though it wasn't the formal process that
Mhm.
people expect. And I loved it. And I knew from that point on that she was going to be really receptive and the hypnosis was going to be a good modality for her. So I
Mhm.
think you're right. I think that kids are so much more intuitive, so much more smarter than adults give them credit for. And even little kids. I've worked with children as young as 4, and
Wow.
they come up with the best solutions.
Mm.
Sometimes, Dana, Jen, I kind of feel guilty. I think like I should be paying this kid, right? Because they're giving me the answers. I remember one 5-year-old, he came, his parents brought him to me because he was really stressed out and he was having some problems with emotional regulation. And so, you know, when I would see parent families in my office, I had like a little separation in the space so that the parents would be a little bit off to the side. And then another thing that I would do is that I was barefoot and I invited the kid to take their shoes and socks off too.
Mhm.
So we automatically had that alignment and that separation from the parents that kept their shoes on. And so, I'm just asking him about these things, and he's playing with some toys, and that's a cool thing when we're working with young kids. We can have them be busy, right? Have the little fidget things and drawing or coloring, and then we can take advantage of what's known as floating attention, which is their subconscious mind really listening. And I asked him, I said, "Well, what in these times when you get so frustrated, so angry, what do you think you should do? What would help you?" And he just looked at me and goes, "I need to take a breather." And that was it. He already knew. And
Mhm.
so we practiced the different ways to take a breather. And, um, he came in with a solution. And so many of our clients, no matter what age they already know at some level what's
Mhm.
going to help them, what's going to shift things for them. Maybe it's not yet at a conscious level. And we need to help elicit that. And I don't know if this has happened to you ladies, but there have been many times when one of those solutions appears, and then we start to put it into practice, and we do some future pacing, doing a mental rehearsal for it. And then they return and they say, "Oh, your idea was so good." I'm like, it came from them. But that's okay. Let's give
Mhm.
hypnosis the credit, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because that's what hypnosis does. It pushes aside the distractions. And modern day society, kids nowadays, wow, there's so much on them. They're exposed to so much, not just with the technology that they're tapping into all the time, but the conversations that adults are having that are stressful, that their
Mhm.
friends are bringing in. And so to be able to put all of that aside and then just really go into what really matters to them and to discover what their strengths are, maybe things that they never even knew about or that they've forgotten about. And then also to create that blueprint, because this is the real power of hypnosis. And when I explain to kids that we're going to make a map for that incredible part of your mind. And with young kids, I might describe it as the dreaming mind, because it is the dreaming mind, right? That we're going to make this map for it to follow so that it can get off of the map that's been happening, whether it's anxiety or, different kinds of fears or even phobic responses or feeling bad about themselves in some way or another. We
Mhm.
want to create this new one. And they like that. They really gravitate to that. And then together we use their frames. And that's part of that information gathering part where we're going to find out what their interests and strengths are. And then it all just kind of evolves and it's very collaborative. It's not a matter of me doing something to them, or most importantly, me as an adult telling them what they should be doing, or what kind of person they should be,
Mhm.
because that's not going to work, because that's been happening all the time, right?
Right. Yeah,
Yes.
that's right. And they're coming to you for something different. So, when you say make a map,
Yeah.
do you literally like draw a map, or is that more of a metaphorical idea for them?
Well, I create the expectation of that early on. Sometimes in my intake, what I'll do, and I did that yesterday with this young girl, I use the whiteboard here on, I use Zoom, and I said, I'm going to do a very scientific diagram here to explain what's been happening in your brain, in your nervous system. And she was, a little bit of an analytical thinker. So, because I don't know if you've noticed, the really smart kids are the ones that get the anxiety the worst, right? Well, it's because we people that think a lot can get ourselves in trouble with all that thinking.
Sure.
Right? And so what I did then is to draw three trees, and I'm a left-hander, but I use my right hand with the mouse, so the trees are very awkward looking. And then I just make a path through them. And I said, so at some point in your life, this is that anxiety program, and it got downloaded. It does for everybody. It might happen when we're a baby and we're yelling and our mommy doesn't come, or maybe there's a loud noise, and that creates that first neural pathway. And then when that's repeated, it gets stronger. And just like the path through the woods, that pathway can turn into a rut, then it can turn into a ditch, it can become a trench. And after a while, with enough repetition, especially if it's, with a lot of emotion, things that are important to you when it happens, then your brain and your nervous system automatically go into it. And with this girl, she was feeling anticipatory anxiety about um, social settings. She was feeling it even when she was home safe in her room. And this is where that chronic anxiety sets up
Mm.
house in a person's body on a physiological level. And she got it. And I said, well, the good news is, and then I just make some new paths. Hypnosis is going to create some new pathways, some new, more helpful ways of thinking and feeling and responding. And she
Mm.
was all on board. So when we got to that point where we're creating that blueprint, that new map, that image was already in her mind, and she was on board. Okay, this is the new pathway, this is where we're going, this is how I'd rather be feeling. And of course, I had to get that information from her. How would you rather feel when you're in class and the
Mhm.
teacher calls on you, right? How would you rather be feeling when you're going to the sleepover at your best friend's house? And that's the information that I can use, the fodder, her metaphors, her feelings, and those are included in that map. And we know as hypnosis practitioners that one of the ways that hypnosis works is that part of our mind, which we call the subconscious, doesn't know the difference between real and fantasy.
Mhm.
So when we feed it this new map, then it thinks these things are already happening and it starts to change. It's almost like, resetting the GPS, right? This
Mhm.
is where we want to go now. This is how we want to be experiencing this. It lays down these new tracks, and this can be really uncanny. It can be really weird. I got feedback last night from this girl's parents. She'd had, wrapped up in all this anxiety, had developed a little bit of an eating phobia. And that's why they reached out to me, because they were concerned that at age 11, this was going to turn into something really problematic.
Yeah.
And following the session, she had asked for a chicken burrito, which was totally off her regular map of eating. So
Mm,
it can feel weird, it can feel uncanny, but it's just because the subconscious mind has changed direction. The selective attention factor of it has been reset. And even young kids can understand that when we present it to them, maybe even with a graphic of that pathway through the forest. And then we reinforce, and repetition is important for so many things. In a session, I will repeat the same concepts. And I think that one of my skills is to take rather complex ideas and make them be more simple and easier to comprehend, even for a child, right?
yeah. Well, so then would you give a kid homework? Like, is the, I know you mentioned the self hypnosis, and teaching that, and you did mention tapping, but I'm just wondering, is that part of your process with kids?
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't call it homework. There's kind of an association with homework, one more homework.
Sure,
Actually, kids
sure.
nowadays, I feel bad for them. They have homework. Second grader has an hour of homework. Jeepers, right?
Right.
So, I frame it for even adult kids as a recess. Imagine taking a little recess and doing this thing. For kids, I think an ideal time to do it is right before bed. They're winding down for the day, and then they can do, whether it's the tapping. And when I teach tapping, EFT type things, I really simplify it.
Hmm.
And I also teach it in a way that parents can use it, so that it can be almost a ritual. And when I was working in person, I would actually have a kid tap on their parent, and that was pretty cool. So again,
Yeah, that is cool.
we're turning the tables, right? And then I framed it as a time where you could be just tapping and telling your day's story, just for no other reason but to get rid of the day's stress, right? And discharge all of that. So that's one way. That's one wonderful self-hypnosis tool that can be used. I teach bilateral stimulation, which you guys are probably familiar with, and I've kind of hijacked that in some ways too, where if you're teaching this technique where, the kids, I use my contact juggling ball to demonstrate it, but we're teaching them how to use this to pass it from side to side. Their eyes are following it, and we know the scientific reasoning for doing this is that states of anxiety are not necessarily a chemical imbalance, but they're a brain activity imbalance. And doing this simple eye movement, hand exercise will bring the brain into balance. And I start to slow it down for them, and then have them speed it up. And I ask them to notice what's happening with their nervous system. And they're amazed. They're like, wait a minute, I'm the one that's making that happen. And this, every single thing that I do is not just some kind of curative approach, but it's also a lesson. I want to teach them how much agency they have over their physiology, because that's one of the
Hmm.
great things about learning about the mind-body connection, that
Hmm.
ideomotor response, that, what we're doing, whether it's from the bottom up, a physical thing, or the way that we're thinking can affect everything. And so, because I work with a lot of school kids, they may not want to be doing this, and they're at their desk, right?
Sure.
Everyone's going to be looking at them going, what's going on with Kelley over there? Weirdo. And so I teach them a different version of it, which is where they will take their two fingers on each hand, and they'll tap on the apex of their knee. And we'll just do that. And we'll speed it up, and we'll slow it down. And it's effectively the same thing as bilateral stimulation. We're
Interesting.
activating those different sides of the body, different sides of the brain, and it also can give them a little bit of a rhythm. And what we know about rhythms and patterns, they can be hypnotic. So we can accelerate, and we can get really excited about things, just like, the night before Christmas or your birthday.
Hmm.
It's just the same physical response as anxiety, or we can calm it down. And this is a tactic that lots of kids really resonate with, and
Hmm.
they're like, I can do that. Doesn't seem like homework either, right? Because they don't have to be thinking anything. And I think the main thing is that, especially with teenagers, and many kids have already been to therapy. That's just kind of the our society now, right? They've been taking, going to cognitive therapy or some other kind of therapy because they've been struggling with these problems, but they don't want to do the homework. Or they'll say, when that anxiety attack hits, that panic attack hits, I can't think. Of course not, because it's a flight or fight response, and your cognitive abilities are being taxed, and all your energy is going to your big muscle groups so you can run away or fight that woolly mammoth. And
Yeah.
and so I want to teach them things that they can do that will transcend having to think. And NLP techniques are fantastic for this, using anchoring, anchor collapses, these tapping things that are going to have an automatic response because it's wired in. And my job is to make the case that you need to repeat it, because just like this habit that you have, whether it's picking your nose, pulling your hair, chewing on your nails, or having anxiety, it didn't get there overnight. It's had all this repetition to get there. And so we want to be displacing that with something that's going to be better for you. And that usually seems to have a pretty good response for the kids. So they're doing their part. And again, it's requires that they're motivated. I a couple weeks ago I worked with for the first time with a 10-year-old whose mother had booked the appointment, and when, I really got to talk to him, and it was all about changing his eating habits. That was what mother wanted. And, I'm really cautious in that area. I'm super cautious about any kind of, weight issues for kids, because we know it's not about the food. And so in asking him, what he wanted to change, I was blatant. I said, do you want to quit eating the junk food? And he said, not really. And so I said, well, what is it that you'd really like? He goes, I just want to feel better. And so that was what our session was
Hmm.
based on at that
Hmm.
point. So sometimes what parents want is completely different than what the children want. And I
Hmm.
respect that. The child is my client.
Yes, that's right. Well, I want to ask a follow-up question on the knee tapping
Yeah.
because that's such a wonderful specific technique with the bilateral demonstration that you were doing. Obviously, that's using your eyes also.
Yes.
So, with the knee tapping, are the eyes involved?
I give them the option, and just kind of backing up a little bit. When I teach them the actual bilateral tool of passing an object from side to side and following it with their eyes, um, I also give them that choice of opening or closing their eyes, which is kind of weird to think about. But giving them that choice. Remember when I was talking about giving them choices? And this created a whole nother spin on it, where they could be actually closing their eyes and having them follow from side to side. And it creates a little bit of diffusion automatically. And so I do the same thing when I just move that down to the knee tapping, that they can be doing that with their eyes open or closed, but also understanding when we look down, if you look down right now, it has the same effect as closing your eyes, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Basically blocks out all that periphery, all that distraction. And this is some of the way that I prepare a kid for a little bit of a more formal hypnotic experience, because a lot of kids don't want to close their eyes. And I think this is one of the things that makes hypnotherapists uncomfortable,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
they're expecting the child to close their eyes, and then they're just going to take them on that relaxing journey, blah, blah, blah. And the kid's eyes are open and they're looking around. What do I do now? And so if we can preempt that by telling them that there's lots of ways to do this. You can have your eyes open or closed, or you might just decide to look down at your lap. And sometimes I'll have them focus like on their hand, and I have a process I call the hand induction that I originally learned from Melissa Tears, and it just has the focus go from that hand to another hand to the elbow to the shoulder to the shoulder to the elbow to the hand. It's like this circular, very rhythmic thing that just pulls them right in. And it's also really effective for any kind of habit that involves the hands. And if you think about a lot of the habits that not just kids but adults come to us with, the hands are involved. They're complicit, right?
Mhm.
They're feeding us. They're you know, doing things for us. And so it gives you an opportunity to really have them create that relationship with that body part. And just like with adults, kids get disconnected with their bodies. And I love that a lot of schools are now including mindfulness, where they're having kids get in touch with their bodies, with their breath, doing a body scan. So some of that work is done in advance for us. And often children will tell me, oh, we did that in school. And they'll be really proud that they already know that. And I say, ooh, I love working with kids like you that already know this. Because one thing that many kids share is that they want to be good at something. And when we can acknowledge that and find out what their strengths are, you know, whether it's that they know some mindfulness, or they can, you know, run fast, or they can do some art, that's very important, because often the spotlight has been on the problem, what's
Yes.
wrong with the kid. And I
Mhm.
want to um, diffuse that and focus on those strengths, and then we can, it's much easier to find the solutions, and remind kids that there's so much more than the problem. And and they're not even their strengths, are they? I mean, every kid deserves to be loved unconditionally, not based on how they perform or what they can do or what they look like. And I think
Absolutely.
that creating that kind of a space for them where they feel seen and heard, it really is the true power of any kind of therapy. And when we can let them see themselves that way through the lens of hypnosis, as most kids are very imaginative, they can imagine that picture of themselves, that that screen of themselves doing that thing the way that they want to, or experiencing life the way they want to, then everything can change, and we can really get them into that, not just a hope state, but creating a new reality for themselves.
Now, let me ask you this with kids. Do you have a general number of sessions? Of course, every kid is different. I'm not asking you to, pigeonhole kids, but what would be a typical span of time? Is it number of sessions? Is it number of months? Or do they come back later? Like, how do you see that in all your years of working with kids?
Yeah, you know, I used to work in that session package format, and well, probably about 10 years ago I just gave up on that. And for many reasons. And what I do with kids and with their parents is that I say, because there's a lot of curiosity but also uneasiness about hypnosis. And when you think about parents, the level of trust they have to bring their kid to us, because parents come with their own lack of information about what hypnosis really is. And I'm just really admire them for having that kind of courage, to tell you the truth. And and so I suggest that they present me as a mind coach, number one, and that our first encounter is an experiment. Let's do an experiment and see how it feels. And that takes a lot of pressure off. And then typically what happens is that, you know, I suggest that they see how things feel over the next day or two, and let me know. And if we need to have another session, I'm here. And probably 50% of the time, we do book another session. Sometimes, the girl that I worked with yesterday, her father just booked 2 more sessions for her weekly sessions. And I think that that's appropriate for, where she is. And, but other times it might just be one. So I like to really play it as it goes. I don't, and I know that's a crummy business model, but it works for me. And, and, and I like to have that flexibility in my own work, and then also um, for my clients too. And often the kids will say, they'll be honest. They'll say, they'll tell their parent if it worked for them or not, if they liked it or not, and we know we can't help everybody. And there have been times where I was disappointed. I wish I'd had more time with that particular child or
Mhm.
teen. But sometimes we're also part of a team where we're coming in every now and then. And I worked with a uh, national snowboarder who, I mean, she's amazing, but she had some pretty serious problems. So she had her own psychiatric team, and then I was called in to be, hypnotherapy integrated part, and our work was phenomenal. It was so great. It was so neat to be part of her whole healing team. And she went on to make some really great changes within herself, and even while she was in top competition, which was impressive.
Wow.
So I think being flexible,
Mhm.
being flexible and resilient. And if we can be that way, then we can model that for our clients too. And as a former high school teacher, kids kids know when you're BSing them. They know who is real
Sure.
and who
Yeah.
is a fake. And so luckily I've always got along great with kids. And but I don't try to be anything that I'm not, and I don't try to be cool like them. Sometimes I'll even, use my own ignorance of pop culture and stuff just to be, you know, awkward, and they love it. They're okay with
Yeah.
that because I'm being genuine.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, Jen, what questions do you have?
Well, I'm just totally inspired. I mean, by your like body of work and also just
Mhm.
who you are. Like, I just love the calm. Like, I'm sure the kids that are dealing with anxiety when they're coming to you, I mean, just your whole energy is wonderful. So, I want to know about. I see that you do like mentee work. How does are you doing that currently with hypnotists?
I do a lot of mentoring, and in 2013, I started a private Facebook group called Hypnotic Women, and we currently have about 3,700 members from all over the world in it. It's a private, yes, Dana's in it, private Facebook group. And I think a lot of the women in this group have gotten to know me over the years because I post quite a bit and share things in there. And it's just such a great resource. And so I do a lot of mentoring with women from that group, although I mentor some men also. And it's usually not just people who are new to the business, but maybe people who are wanting to kind of take their work to a different level where it's feeling more organic and even more enjoyable to them, because we all start out with some frame of how hypnosis needs to be done, and we all need those guidelines, but then at some point we might find that they're restrictive in some way. And so I think that's kind of my forte, is to help inspire people to really get out of their own head and to be present in a session in a way so that our own subconscious mind can be doing most of the work. And again, sometimes I'm amazed I get to do this work and I get paid well for it. Okay, those
See,
things happen, and actually
no, they do.
sometimes I leave those things in just for an example of how life happens, right?
Exactly.
And I think that there's so much pressure on us to do things perfectly.
It must
And
be perfect.
Yeah.
yeah, and when we can finally let go of that, then we can start to have fun and we can really,
Mhm.
and even more importantly, we can really connect with our clients and and we can start to notice things that maybe if we were so much more in our head, we would have missed. Those little cues, whether they're the nonverbal cues or something that they say, those metaphors that they drop. I love metaphorical work. I think that's, one of my favorite things to do. Or, maybe we'll know the opportune time to bring in some prop that will help. I don't know.
I
Oh,
love it. Well, you do.
this,
Do you use those props with adults too?
yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes I
Yeah.
do. One of that's Mr. Nutty, by the way. One of the things
I love it.
I love it. The same kid that I worked with last night, I asked her, this is a question I always ask kids, what do you think hypnosis is like? And sometimes they'll say, I don't know. A lot of young people will say, I don't know. And I've learned from some of my mentees that that's really frustrating. What do you do when they just say, I don't know? Well, the reason they're saying that is because they don't want to be wrong. They
Mhm.
may have some ideas, but they don't want to be wrong because they're so used to the testing atmosphere in school, right? So they'll just say, I don't know. But this girl didn't. She said, oh, well, my dad told me that you wouldn't have one of those swinging pocket watches. And then I brought it out. And her face, she was so delighted. She said, he was wrong. I said, yes. She goes, are you going to hypnotize me with that? And I said, well, I could, but I could also show you something even more important, like, so it's swinging in one direction and now it's going in another. And then before I even talk about it, it's changed directions and her eyes just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I use a prop like this, our swing pocket watch, to demonstrate the mind body connection, ideal motor response, how our thoughts create motion, and it's a perfect segue into what we're going to be doing. Her thoughts, her worries, her stress, and the what ifs were creating an anxiety response in her body. And so I can use these props in this way to really get the lesson across in a way other than just talking. And I think you as as a former teacher, that we've got different learning um, abilities in different people. And I'm a real visual learner, so I'm great at reading stuff. But maybe they're going to want to hear it, and maybe they're going to want to see a graphic, forced with pathway, or maybe they're going to want to see a kinesthetic thing like that. Oh, she got her iPod charger and she was hanging it in front of me trying to make it move. So I
Nice.
know she's a kinesthetic learner, right?
Mhm.
So but I think that being flexible and picking up on those cues and really paying attention, we have to be great observers when we're working with clients, especially kids, because kids show the nonverbal things. I mean, they will tick, they will wiggle, they will scratch, they will twirl their hair. They haven't learned how to control all that stuff as we adults have.
Mhm.
So those are great clues for us.
Amazing.
Wonderful.
Just like to further that question about the mentee, would somebody sign up to work with you or like, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
one-on-one? Okay.
everything is available on my website, woodshypnosis.com, and so they can, contact me through it. And same thing, I don't offer any kind of package. We do one-on-one sessions via Zoom. They're usually about 90 minutes long, and I can record the session. Sometimes it's experiential because we know the value of learning like that. And,
Mhm.
it might be, I've had colleagues that wanted to work on their own confidence in working with clients, or sometimes they're, wanting to experience maybe how I would do a pain relief session for somebody. And, and so I found that making a recording of that is really important because that allows them to really let go so that the hypnotherapist part of them isn't thinking, now I need to remember that she's fat and why is she doing that? And it really makes a difference, right? So they can review it later if they need it. And then I support, anything that we do with any kind of scripts or resources. But one of the ways that I support my mentees is if they have particular cases, maybe they have a topic that they've never worked with before. And after 23 years, I've worked with everything, but I even helped a lady who had an absolute phobia of lettuce. So some obscure things come in, and so I think I'm pretty adept at coming up with some approach for them. And it helps them just to have, someone to bounce ideas off. And my job is not to tell them what to do, just like with my clients. My job is to help them tap into what they already know and maybe augment that with some ideas and resources too. And I think that this makes a great collaboration. And so I know lots of people have been really pleased with my work in mentoring, and I enjoy it. It's one of my favorite aspects of my work because every time that I help another hypnotist become more effective, I know that that's spreading out. It's affecting even more people than I could on a one-on-one client basis.
So the fact that people know you, I guess, primarily as a pediatric hypnotist, but would you say that?
It's,
Or
it's one of my niches, but I'm a
okay.
generalist actually. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like maybe how much of a percentage would that be of your business?
I'd say it's probably about 30% currently,
30%. Okay.
yeah, of my client trade. But um, there, as we go through life brings us all kinds of things, doesn't it? And I have,
Mhm.
over the last few years, really been delving into the topics of grief and loss, and that was prompted. Well, after probably more than 5 or 6 years ago, I work I work in the area of cancer care, and so I was losing some clients, and um, so I started to become more interested in how I could not only become more effective in that area, but how I could deal with the loss myself. And Roger Moore and Roger is a close friend. He has a practice down in um, the Palm Springs area in California now. We we actually hosted Suzanne O'Brien, who has a death doula company,
Mm.
doulagivers.com, and because this end of life doula uh, was getting traction. This was about 5 years ago through our country. A person who could come in and kind of map that space between what hospice provides and death. And so we hosted her, and we also came up with a training for hypnotherapists for end of life too. So that was kind of the catalyst. And then I started having some losses in my own personal life that were sudden and unexpected and very tragic. And I got pulled into that. And so, I'm currently working still on a book on that, but there's, even actively, there are things happening in my personal life that are based on that whole topic. And it's given me a deeper awareness of the importance of talking about it, of erasing the stigma of not just dying, but different areas of dying, like suicide, and engaging people in these conversations and letting and helping people get more comfortable with it, and then after a death, being able to process and manage their grief in helpful ways. So it's been fascinating. So that's a whole nother area of my work that I'm really dedicated to.
I'm actually familiar with her because I've done some webinars with her. So you
Great.
mentioned
Okay.
it's just really,
she's
really interesting. So yeah,
she's amazing.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
So
And it dovetails in with my work with kids, because kids experience loss. And I currently have a 16-year-old client whose 20-year-old sister died of an overdose, and it put him in a deep depression. I've had other teens that have lost friends or relatives. Um, it helping kids navigate that whole area is super important, and sometimes they get kind of forgotten. So I think this is a perfect area for hypnosis.
well, I can see the wings behind you, and I'm just really glad that you're there for these people and these children.
Mhm.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Definitely. Well, and that brings us to our next segment, which is called our silly subconscious question. And what we'd like to know from you, Kelly, is if you were a superhero, what would be your power and why?
Ooh, wow. If I were, you mean I'm not?
Well, we think you are.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think it would probably be being able to dive deep. One of my aliases is Mesmer Maid, and being able to go under that realm. And of course, that's a a metaphor for the subconscious. But I love the oceans. I live near the ocean, and there's a whole world that's unseen there. So my superhero thing would be to go down there. And I don't know if it would do any good for the world, but I sure would love it.
Nice.
Well, and we don't know what's really down there, do we? It's so funny that we go to space, but we don't go to the the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, and it's a whole nother realm, and that's what we as hypnotists are exploring always, and letting people drift down there and find out what's really true for them, and what's really important to sift past those distractions. And so I love that whole idea.
Love it.
Amazing. And we have another question, which we always
Okay,
ask people is
suck it
beyond
to me.
this world of hypnosis, what lights you up? What are some passions that you have?
Oh my goodness, there are lots besides my family. I live in this beautiful area of that's just filled with nature. I've got a forest next to my house, a lake that I kayak on. I love sailing, so I think being out in nature is really a big part of me, and I'm so fortunate to have a life where I can access it freely, just walking out my door. And it reminds me that we are of nature. That's where we come from. And even my forest, I'm living in a house that I inherited from my parents who died about a year ago within 3 weeks of each other, and they left me this home. And the forest is, sometimes I think about when you lose somebody, you're kind of wandering through this forest of grief, but it is healing, and it needs some tending, but I'm keeping it as natural as I can. But I remember reading a quote that was, when you heal nature, you heal yourself. And so that's a big resource for me.
Gorgeous. And that painting beside you, I just see you wandering through your forest. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I bring it inside too.
exactly.
Well, with your last name, you kind of were
There you go,
born into
right?
it, weren't
Yeah,
It's
you?
the
just
weirdest
kind
thing that worked out, right? I'm glad it wasn't desert.
of.
Well, I think we could speak to you for hours. So if
Yes.
hopefully you'll come back and visit with us again sometime. Thank you
Thank you.
for your time.
Thank
Yeah.
you for spending
And
time with me.
say that, I'm sorry.
Thank you for spending time with me.
We appreciate it. And with that, Jen, what do we always say?
Peace out.
Peace out.
Okay. Peace out to you.